Your dog follows you into the hallway, the kitchen, the laundry room, and sometimes even to the bathroom. At first, it seems easy to explain. Maybe your dog simply wants to be near you. Maybe he is looking for attention. Or perhaps he has just learned that people tend to be more interesting than whatever else is happening in the house. And sometimes those explanations may be partly true. But there is something curious about this behavior. Many dogs seem to know you are about to move before you actually move. You may still be sitting in your chair. You have not taken a single step, and yet your dog is already lifting his head, already watching, sometimes even standing up. What many people notice first is the following itself: the footsteps, the shadow that appears behind them as they walk through the house. But that may not be where the behavior truly begins, because in many cases, your dog may have started paying attention several seconds earlier, and that matters more than it may seem. Have you ever started to stand up from your chair and noticed your dog reacting almost immediately? Not when you began walking, before that. Sometimes all it takes is a small shift in posture, a slight lean forward, a hand moving toward the armrest, and suddenly your dog is looking at you, or lifting his head from the floor, or quietly getting to his feet. What many people miss is how closely dogs observe everyday movement, not in a dramatic way, just as part of living alongside us. Over time, small actions can become surprisingly meaningful. A glance toward the hallway, the way you usually stand before leaving a room, even the timing of certain movements during the day. These details may seem insignificant to us, but for a dog, they can become reliable clues about what is likely to happen next. So, when your dog follows you down the hallway, he may not simply be reacting to movement. In many cases, he may have noticed the beginning of that movement before you were even aware of it yourself. And that naturally leads to another question: how does your dog learn which movements actually matter? Dogs live in a world that is far more predictable than many of us realize. Most households follow patterns, not perfectly, but often closely enough for a dog to notice. The same morning routine, the same evening routine, the same sequence of small events that repeats day after day. You finish your coffee, push your chair back, walk toward the hallway, and a few moments later, something familiar happens. Perhaps you go to the kitchen, perhaps you pick up the leash, or perhaps you disappear behind the bathroom door for a minute or two. To us, these may feel like unrelated actions. To a dog, they can become connected over time. This is where a common misunderstanding can appear. Many owners see the dog following and assume the dog is making a decision in that moment, but sometimes the process started much earlier. The dog may already be responding to a pattern he has seen hundreds of times before, not because he knows the future, and not because he is constantly planning ahead, but because experience has taught him that certain events often lead to other events. The bathroom may not be the destination that interests him most. It may simply be one stop in a routine he has quietly learned to recognize. And once we see that pattern, the behavior can start to look a little different. At this point, it can be tempting to reach a simple conclusion. If a dog pays this much attention to a person, he must be dependent on that person. But those two things are not always the same. A dog can be highly aware of where you are without feeling distressed when you move. In fact, many dogs seem to treat their owners as important points of reference throughout the day. They check in, they observe, they keep track of what is happening around them, and then they go back to resting. Some studies on dog human attachment suggest that owners may serve as a kind of secure base for their dogs, not necessarily because the dog is worried, but because the presence of a familiar person can help the dog feel comfortable and confident while navigating the environment around him. You may have seen this yourself. Your dog follows you into another room, looks around for a moment, then lies down and relaxes. The goal was not constant interaction, and perhaps not even attention. Sometimes the simple act of knowing where you are seems to be enough. That distinction matters because it helps explain why following behavior can look very similar in different dogs while meaning something quite different underneath. And that is where many owners begin to misread what they are seeing. One of the most common assumptions is that a dog who follows his owner everywhere must be unusually attached or perhaps even anxious. And from the outside, that can seem like a reasonable conclusion. After all, the dog gets up when you get up, moves when you move, and often appears wherever you happen to be. But behavior can be misleading when we focus only on what is visible. A dog may follow you into three different rooms and still feel perfectly comfortable settling alone a few minutes later. Another dog may follow in a very similar way, yet become noticeably unsettled the moment a door closes between you. The behavior looks almost identical. The emotional experience behind it may not be. This is where many owners accidentally focus on the långdistansförstånd. Instead of asking, why does my dog follow me? It can be more useful to ask, how does my dog respond when he cannot follow me? That small shift often reveals much more, because the following itself is only one piece of the picture. What happens when the option disappears can tell us far more about what the behavior actually means. And that distinction becomes especially important when deciding whether the behavior is simply part of normal daily life. For many dogs, following their owners from room to room is simply part of everyday life. It may happen several times a day without signaling any problem at all. Imagine a familiar scene. You stand up to get a glass of water. Your dog follows. A few minutes later, you walk toward the bathroom. Your dog follows again. Then you return to the living room, sit down, and before long, your dog settles nearby or chooses a comfortable spot of his own. Nothing about that sequence necessarily suggests anxiety. In many cases, it reflects a dog who is paying attention to household activity and choosing to stay connected to it. Some dogs prefer to stay close. Others stop at the doorway. Some watch from across the room without moving at all. The distance itself is often less important than the dog's ability to remain relaxed. A dog who can comfortably rest, explore the house, or settle alone when nothing interesting is happening is often showing something valuable. Not dependence, confidence. And once we begin looking at the dog's overall emotional state rather than the footsteps alone, the behavior can start to make a lot more sense. Because sometimes the most important part is not that the dog follows, it is how easily the dog relaxes when he doesn't. Of course, there are situations where following behavior may be telling a different story. The challenge is that the first part often looks very similar. The dog follows you into the hallway, waits outside a door, moves when you move. At a glance, it may look no different from the behavior we have already discussed. The difference often appears when the dog is no longer able to stay close. Perhaps a door closes, perhaps you step into another part of the house, or perhaps you leave for a short period of time. Some dogs simply settle and wait. Others may begin pacing, watching the door repeatedly, whining, moving from room to room without relaxing. What behavior experts often pay attention to is not the following itself, but the dog's ability to cope with separation, even brief separation. A dog who follows because he enjoys being near you can usually recover fairly quickly when you are unavailable. A dog who is struggling emotionally may find that much harder. That does not automatically mean there is a serious problem, and it certainly does not mean every shadow-like dog is anxious. But it does remind us to look beyond the movement and pay attention to the emotional state underneath it, because that is often where the most useful information can be found. If your dog does tend to follow you everywhere, the goal is usually not to stop the behavior. In many cases, there is no need to. Following can be a normal part of a healthy relationship between a dog and owner. What often matters more is whether the dog feels comfortable when that closeness is temporarily unavailable. And that confidence is usually built through everyday experiences, small ones. A comfortable place to rest, predictable routines, quiet opportunities to settle without constant interaction. Sometimes owners unintentionally make every moment together feel important. The dog gets attention whenever he approaches. Every movement becomes a shared activity. Every room change becomes an invitation to follow. There is nothing wrong with affection, but independence grows when a dog also learns that calm moments have value, that it is perfectly safe to remain relaxed while someone moves around the house. For some dogs, this develops naturally. For others, it develops gradually through repetition, not through forcing distance, and not through ignoring the dog, but through helping him discover that being alone for a few moments is just another normal part of the day. And once that confidence is there, following becomes a choice rather than a need. The next time your dog follows you toward the bathroom, try watching the moment a little differently. Not when he reaches the doorway, not when he appears beside you a few seconds earlier. Watch what happens before the footsteps. Perhaps you shift your weight in the chair, perhaps you glance toward the hallway, perhaps you simply begin preparing to stand, and almost immediately your dog notices a lift of the head, a brief look in your direction, a subtle change in posture. Small things that are easy to miss when we are focused on where the dog ends up. By now, the behavior may look a little different than it did at the beginning of this video. Sometimes your dog may be following out of attachment, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes because a familiar routine is unfolding once again, and sometimes it may simply be the result of a dog paying close attention to the person who shares his everyday world. The bathroom was never really the interesting part. The interesting part was everything that happened before your dog decided to follow. And once you start noticing those small moments, you may discover that your dog has been observing far more than you realized.